The first time Sergeant Marcus Webb heard the engine, there was nothing outside the wire. He had checked. He had walked the full perimeter of forward operating Base Kestrel in the flat, windless dark of the Iraqi desert, flashlight low, boots quiet on the gravel, and he had seen nothing. No vehicles on the road, no movement in the dust, nothing. But the engine sound had followed him the entire way around, staying just far enough behind him that he could never quite locate it, like a sound heard underwater, present but impossible to pin down. He reported it to his watch commander and was told it was probably the generator on the south end of the base running rough. He accepted that explanation because it was offered with confidence, and he was tired, and it was 4:45 a.m., and the sun would be up in 2 hours. He went to his bunk and lay down and stared at the ceiling and listened, and the sound was gone. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. That was in October. By December, 4 other servicemen at FOB Kestrel had reported hearing the same thing, an engine running in the dark outside the base, always at night. Always at a distance that made it impossible to identify the vehicle, always stopping the moment anyone went to look. Master Sergeant Donna Carver was the senior NCO on base when the reports started coming in with regularity, and she was not a person who dismissed things without looking at them first. She had spent 19 years in the Army, had served in 3 different countries, and had developed over those years a reliable internal compass for the difference between soldiers letting their imaginations run in the dark and soldiers reporting something real. The reports about the engine bothered her, not because they were dramatic or hysterical, but because they were consistent. Different people, different nights, different positions around the perimeter, all describing the same thing. Low, steady, diesel, moving. She pulled the maintenance logs for every military vehicle assigned to FOB Kestrel. She cross-referenced them with the watch logs for the nights in question. Every vehicle was accounted for. Every vehicle was either parked in the motor pool or had a logged reason for being on the road. None of them matched the reported sound locations. She set up 2 additional observation posts on the north and west perimeters and doubled the watch rotation for 2 weeks. The engine was heard 3 more times during that period, once on a Tuesday at 2:10 a.m. and twice the following weekend, on Saturday at 11:40 p.m. and Sunday at 3:30 a.m. Each time the observer at the closest post reported the sound clearly, described it as large and diesel-powered, and each time when they attempted to locate it visually or with thermal equipment, they found nothing. On the second Sunday, the thermal equipment at Post 4 went dark for 6 minutes during the period when the engine sound was reported. When it came back online, it was fully functional with no logged error. The tech team found no explanation for the outage. Donna wrote all of this in her personal journal because she did not quite know what category to file it under in an official report. The soldier who experienced the most disturbing incident involving the vehicles was a 26-year-old specialist named Anthony Prout from Knoxville, Tennessee. Anthony was assigned to the motor pool, which meant he spent his days working with the very machines that had started to feel, to some people on the base, like they were behaving differently at night. He was a practical person by nature and by upbringing, the son of a mechanic, raised around engines the way some children are raised around music. And he did not believe in things that could not be explained through cause and effect. He began to revise that position on a Wednesday night in the middle of December. Anthony had stayed late in the motor pool that evening finishing a repair on a Humvee that had been running hot. It was a straightforward job, a coolant line replacement, and he had taken longer than expected because the fitting was stripped and needed additional work. He finished at 9:20 p.m., cleaned his tools, locked the bay, and was walking back across the motor pool yard toward the main base when he noticed that one of the MRAPs, a massive armored vehicle that weighed close to 15 tons, was parked at a slightly different angle than it had been when he arrived that morning. He stopped and looked at it. He looked at the ground around it, at the gravel patterns, at the tire impressions in the dust. He walked around it slowly. The vehicle was fully locked, no engine heat. No sign that anyone had been inside, but the angle was wrong. He was certain of it with the certainty of a person who had spent years working around machines and had developed a kind of spatial memory for where things sat in relation to each other. The MRAP had moved. He went back to the maintenance log. The vehicle had not been assigned to any mission that day. Its key was in the lockbox where it should have been. The lockbox had not been accessed since the previous morning. Anthony stood in the motor pool office under the fluorescent light for a long time looking at the log. Then he looked out the window at the MRAP sitting in the dark yard, angled slightly wrong against the row of other vehicles, and he felt a cold feeling that had nothing to do with the desert night. He said nothing to anyone that evening. He went back the next morning and measured the vehicle's position against the painted lines on the ground using a tape measure. He recorded the measurements in a small notebook. He came back the following morning and measured again. The vehicle had not moved. He came back the morning after that, still unchanged. Then on the fourth morning, a Saturday, he arrived at 6:15 a.m. and the MRAP was in a completely different position. Not slightly different this time, significantly different. It was now facing the exit gate of the motor pool yard, as though pointed toward the road, as though it had been turned around during the night. The key was still in the lockbox. The log showed no activity. The gate camera, which covered the entry and exit of the motor pool, showed nothing unusual, but the camera's footage from the hours between midnight and 4 a.m. had a section of corrupted data, 43 minutes of static, and no one could say why. Anthony brought his notebook to Donna Carver at 8 a.m. that Saturday morning and laid it on her desk without speaking. She read through his measurements, looked at his dates, looked at his handwriting, which was careful and precise and completely without dramatics, and then she looked at him. "You didn't imagine this," she said. "No, ma'am," he said, "and you've been documenting it since the first time." "Yes, ma'am." She closed the notebook. "Sit down, Prout." He sat. She stood and looked out her small window at the motor pool yard below, at the row of vehicles sitting in the pale morning sun. "I'm going to tell you something," she said. "And I want you to understand that I am telling you because you brought me documented evidence, and not because I make a habit of sharing things like this with junior enlisted." She turned from the window. "You are not the first person to report something strange about the vehicles on this base." Anthony looked at her steadily. "We've had multiple reports of an engine heard outside the wire at night," she said. "No source found. Thermal equipment going down exactly when the sound is reported. And now your MRAP moving without explanation." She sat down across from him. "I've been trying to find a rational explanation for all of this for 6 weeks. I haven't found one." Anthony nodded slowly. "What do you want to do?" "I want to put a camera inside the motor pool yard, not the gate camera. Something inside covering the whole yard that doesn't route through the base network." "A personal camera," Anthony said. "A very good personal camera," Donna said. "One that records continuously and stores locally. Can you set that up?" "Yes, ma'am, I can have it done today." "Good." She stood, and Prout, "Not a word of this to anyone else on base, not yet. I don't want to panic over something that might still have a perfectly boring explanation." "Understood," he said. But the way he said it, carefully, without conviction, told her that they both knew at this point that a perfectly boring explanation was becoming harder and harder to believe in. The camera was installed by 3 p.m. that Saturday, mounted on a high bracket on the interior wall of the motor pool storage building, angled to cover the entire yard. It was a commercial-grade unit, motion-activated with a 32-hour battery backup, and it recorded in high definition to a local memory card. Anthony tested it twice, confirmed it was recording, and locked the storage building. That night, a new report came in at 1:15 a.m. from a soldier named Corporal James Jimmy Park at the North Observation Post. Jimmy was 24, Korean-American from Los Angeles, and was known across the base for 2 things: his ability to sleep anywhere and his complete inability to be rattled by anything. He had once remained calm when a camel spider the size of a dinner plate dropped from the ceiling of his tent onto his face while he slept. He had simply picked it up, carried it outside, and gone back to sleep. Jimmy was not calm when he made his report at 1:15 a.m. He had heard the engine again, he said, closer than usual. Much closer, and then he said at approximately 1:10 a.m. he had seen something. Not a shadow, not a heat mirage, not a trick of the desert dark. He had seen a military vehicle on the road just beyond the wire. A Humvee, he thought, or something shaped like one, moving slowly north along the outside perimeter of the base without headlights. He had watched it for approximately 90 seconds. Then it had turned off the road into the open desert and driven into the dark and disappeared. He had logged it, radioed it in, and then sat at his post for the rest of his shift without moving, watching the desert with the particular stillness of a person who has decided that being very still is currently the best possible strategy. Donna was woken at 1:20 a.m. and read Jimmy's report. She dressed and went to the motor pool before she did anything else. The yard was dark and quiet. She walked through it with her flashlight. Every vehicle was accounted for in its place, correctly positioned. She checked the MRAP that Anthony had been monitoring. It was where it had been the day before. She went back to her office and sat in the dark for a while. In the morning, she and Anthony checked the camera. They sat together in the storage building with a laptop and watched the footage from the previous night at double speed, scanning through the dark, static motor pool yard. For the first 3 hours, the footage showed nothing. Gravel, parked vehicles, shadows from the perimeter lights. Then at 1:03 a.m., the footage changed. Not in the way either of them expected. The vehicles did not move. Nothing came over the wall. No human figure appeared anywhere in the yard. What happened was subtler and in some ways more disturbing than any of those things. The engine sound was audible on the camera's audio, faint but clear, a low diesel rumble. And as the sound grew slightly louder, the vehicles in the yard appeared to respond to it, not dramatically, not in a way that would be obvious if you were not watching carefully. But the MRAP that Anthony had been monitoring shifted, not the entire vehicle. Just a degree or two, a slight rotation, as though it had pivoted on its axis, as though it had turned to face the direction the sound was coming from. The motion lasted perhaps 4 seconds and then stopped. And then at 1:16 a.m. the engine sound faded and the MRAP appeared to settle back and the yard returned to stillness. Donna and Anthony watched this section of footage 4 times without speaking. "That's not possible," Anthony said finally. He did not say it with panic. He said it the way an engineer says something is not possible, meaning that all the laws he understands say that this cannot happen, and yet. "I know," Donna said. "A vehicle that size doesn't move on its own, not by 4 degrees, not without an engine running, not without—" "I know," Donna said again. "What do we do with this footage?" Donna was quiet for a long moment. "We keep it," she said. "We get more of it. And we find out what is outside this wire that these machines are responding to." She said it the way she said most things, steadily and without drama. But Anthony noticed that she did not look away from the frozen image on the laptop screen, the massive armored vehicle caught mid-turn in the dark of an empty yard. The next 3 nights were quiet. The engine was not heard. The camera showed nothing unusual. Anthony checked the MRAP each morning and it had not moved. He began to wonder if whatever had been happening had simply stopped, the way strange things sometimes did, without resolution, leaving only the unease of having happened at all. Then on the 4th night everything changed. It was a Tuesday. 14 soldiers from FOB Kestrel were conducting a supply run to a smaller outpost 40 kilometers north, using a convoy of 3 vehicles, 2 Humvees and 1 MRAP. The convoy was led by Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Tesh, a precise and experienced officer, and included among its members both Jimmy Park and a quiet, serious 28-year-old staff sergeant named Elena Vasquez from San Antonio, Texas, who was on her 3rd deployment and who had a reputation for being the calmest person in any situation. The convoy left the base at 7 p.m. and expected to reach the northern outpost by 8:30 p.m. The road was a standard supply route, well-traveled, considered secure. The first hour passed without incident. The 3 vehicles moved in formation, headlights on, comms open, everything normal. Then at 8:04 p.m. the lead Humvee's radio went to static. Not interference, static, total silence. Lieutenant Colonel Tesh tried switching frequencies, nothing. He tried his backup radio, nothing. He signaled to the vehicles behind him to pull up alongside, and when the driver of the second Humvee rolled down his window, Tesh saw immediately that the man's face was wrong. Pale, eyes wide. The driver, a young private named Coates, pointed ahead at the road and mouthed something that Tesh could not read. Tesh looked ahead. There was a vehicle on the road. It was sitting in the middle of the road, facing them, at a distance of perhaps 300 meters. Its headlights were not on. In the moonlight it had the shape of a military Humvee, but even at 300 meters, something about it was not right. It was too dark, as though it absorbed light rather than reflected it. And it was absolutely still. Tesh stopped the convoy. "All vehicles halt," he said into the radio, and then remembered the radio was dead. He stepped out of his Humvee and walked back along the convoy to brief the others in person. Elena was already out of the MRAP when he reached it, standing by the door, watching the vehicle ahead with her hand on her sidearm. "Sir," she said without looking at him. "You see it," he said. Yes, sir, it was not there 60 seconds ago. The road was clear. I was watching. Your radio, dead. All of them. He looked at the Humvee ahead and then at the road beside it, the desert on both sides, flat and gray under the moon. Any other movement? No, sir. Tesh stood for a moment. He was a man who believed in making decisions with available information and not waiting for perfect information that would never come. He had enough now to know that this situation was not standard. We do not advance toward an unidentified vehicle on a dark road with no comms. We hold position. Vasquez, I want eyes on that vehicle. Park, you're with me. Everyone else stays with the vehicles. Jimmy came up alongside the lieutenant colonel, and they moved forward together along the shoulder of the road, careful, slow, watching the stationary vehicle ahead. As they got closer, the wrongness of it became more apparent. It was indeed the shape of a Humvee. But its color was off, darker than standard issue, as though it had been painted sometime long ago, and the color had gone down through many layers of darkness. Its windshield reflected nothing. No moonlight, no horizon, nothing. At 100 meters, Jimmy stopped walking. Sir, he said very quietly. I see it, Tesh said. The tires, sir. Tesh looked at the tires. They were flat. Not just low, completely flat, the vehicle sitting directly on its rims pressed into the road's surface. A vehicle with completely flat tires on a paved road does not drive, cannot drive. And yet here it was in the middle of the road where 60 seconds ago there had been nothing. Back up, Tesh said quietly. Sir, slowly, don't turn around. Back up. They moved backward along the shoulder of the road, eyes on the vehicle, and when they were 20 meters back from where they had stopped, the headlights of the dark Humvee came on. Not a gradual brightening, instantaneous, full brightness pointed directly at them, and in the sudden glare both men stopped moving. The engine started. It was the sound. The low diesel rumble that had been heard outside the wire at Fob Kestrel for weeks. At this distance, in the open night air, it was unmistakable. Deep and steady and slightly wrong in a way that was hard to define, like a recording of an engine rather than an actual one. Like something that had learned to imitate the sound of machinery, without fully understanding what machinery was. Tesh said quietly and clearly, run. They ran. Elena saw them coming at full sprint and had the convoy moving before they reached it, pulling the vehicles into a tight turn on the shoulder of the road. It took less than 90 seconds, all three vehicles repositioned and pointed back toward Fob Kestrel. Tesh and Jimmy reached the lead Humvee and got in, and Tesh said move, and the driver moved. The convoy drove back toward the base at full speed. Every person in every vehicle watched the road behind them through mirrors and rear windows. The dark Humvee did not follow. It did not move at all as far as any of them could tell, shrinking in the mirrors as they drove away, its headlights still burning in the middle of the empty road. At 8:41 p.m., the convoy radioed Fob Kestrel on a working frequency, having regained comms the moment they were 5 kilometers from the incident location. Tesh reported a vehicle obstruction and a communications failure and requested a security assessment of the northern road. He used standard language because standard language was what the moment officially called for. In the vehicle behind him, Elena sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap and said nothing for the entire drive back to base. Jimmy, sitting beside her, also said nothing. There are things that happen in the dark in places far from home that a person needs time to find words for, and both of them understood this without discussing it. When they reached Fob Kestrel at 9:15 p.m., Donna Carver was waiting at the gate. She looked at the returning convoy and then at the faces of the people coming out of the vehicles, and she did not need to ask what had happened. The faces told her enough. She pulled Tesh aside immediately, and he gave her a complete account in the clipped, factual way of an officer writing a report in his head as he speaks. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "This matches a pattern I've been tracking for 6 weeks." Tesh looked at her. "What pattern?" She told him. "All of it. The engine outside the wire. The thermal equipment failures, the camera footage, Anthony's notebook with its careful measurements, the MRAP that moved in the dark." She told him all of it without editorializing and watched his face carefully as she spoke. He was quiet for a long time when she finished. Gerald Tesh was not a man who frightened easily. He had been in the army for 22 years. He had been in firefights, in sandstorms, in a vehicle that rolled into a ditch at 60 kilometers an hour. He was steady. But she could see, looking at his face now in the pale light of the gate, that something had shifted in his understanding of the situation, and the shift had cost him something. "What do you believe it is?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've run out of rational explanations. What is it doing?" "What does it want?" "That," she said, "is what I'm trying to figure out." They called a closed meeting that night at 10:30 p.m. in Donna's office. Present were Donna, Tesh, Anthony, Jimmy, Alina, and a young signals intelligence specialist named Corporal Faye Ockafer, who had been brought in because of her technical expertise and because Donna trusted her to stay level-headed. Donna laid out everything on the table: the reports, the notebook, the camera footage which she played on the laptop for the group, the incident on the road. She laid it out the way a doctor lays out symptoms, not to frighten but to diagnose. The room was very quiet during the camera footage. When the MRAP made its subtle turn in the dark yard, Alina made a small sound and pressed her lips together. Jimmy watched it without blinking. Anthony had seen it before, but watching it again in a room full of people somehow made it feel more real rather than less. "Here is what we know," Donna said when the footage ended. "There is a vehicle, or something that appears to be a vehicle, operating in the area around this base at night. It has been observed outside the wire. It has been observed on the road north of here. It appears to affect electronic equipment and communications in its immediate area. And our own vehicles appear to be responding to its presence in ways that should not be physically possible." She paused. "None of our official explanations have held up." "We have tried, so what do we do?" Tesh asked. "We don't go toward it," Jimmy said immediately, and there was a layer under those words that everyone in the room understood. "Agreed," Donna said. "We do not approach it, but we also don't pretend it isn't there. Ignoring it has not made it go away." She looked around the table. "What I want to propose is this. We set up a comprehensive observation system covering all perimeter approaches. Multiple cameras, multiple formats, some wired and some battery-backed. Faye, can you set up a signal monitoring array that would detect electromagnetic anomalies in real time?" Faye nodded. She was a small, focused woman who spoke rarely but always with precision. "I can have it running in 48 hours. If anything is causing the equipment failures, it should register as an M event before the failure occurs. That gives us warning." "Good. I also want to revisit the camera footage from tonight's incident location if any coverage exists on the northern road from any military or civilian source. I can pull satellite imagery requests." Faye said. "Do it." Donna looked at Anthony. "And I want continuous logging of every vehicle in the motor pool. Position, mileage, fuel, everything. If anything changes between logging intervals, I want to know within the hour." Anthony nodded. He had already been doing most of this unofficially. Now it had the weight of a directive. "What do we tell the rest of the base?" Alina asked. The room considered this. "We tell them there's an unidentified vehicle operating in the area," Tesh said finally. "That's true. We tell them to report any unusual activity around the motor pool or the perimeter. We don't use language that's going to cause unnecessary alarm. But we don't ask people to pretend they aren't seeing what they're seeing." Donna agreed. "Brief your teams honestly. Tell them what we know, not what we don't. And remind them that the most important thing they can do is log everything, accurately and completely." The meeting ended at midnight. People filed out quietly. Alina was the last to leave, and at the door she turned back. "Master Sergeant," she said, "the vehicle on the road, the dark one." She paused when the headlights came on. "I was watching through the MRAP's observation window, and I know this will sound." She stopped, started again. The headlights came on and pointed at Tesh and Park. But they didn't illuminate the road around them. The light didn't fall on the ground the way light should. It was like the headlights were on, but the light wasn't going anywhere. She met Donna's eyes. "I don't know what that means, but I didn't want to not say it." Donna held her gaze steadily. "Thank you, Vasquez, that goes in the log." Alina nodded and left. Donna sat alone in her office for a while after everyone was gone, in the particular silence of a place where many people have just been and now have left. She looked at the camera footage, paused on the image of the MRAP mid-turn in the dark yard. She thought about what she knew, laid it out in her mind the way she laid out everything, in order, in sequence, without emotional coloring. She had been in the army for 19 years. She had learned in those years that the world was large and contained many things that training did not prepare you for. She had learned that courage was not the absence of confusion, but the decision to act clearly in spite of it. She had learned that the most dangerous thing a soldier could do was decide that something was impossible simply because they had never encountered it before. She opened her journal and wrote for 20 minutes, then she closed it and went to check the perimeter. The next 48 hours passed in focused, quiet work. Faye set up her electromagnetic monitoring array at 4 points around the base, small and unobtrusive, running on independent power. Anthony implemented the continuous vehicle logging system with the help of 2 other motor pool soldiers, neither of whom asked too many questions when he told them it was a new maintenance protocol. Jimmy volunteered for an extra observation shift on the north perimeter without being asked. Alina spent 2 hours reviewing the satellite imagery that Faye had requested, searching frame by frame through thermal and standard optical feeds from the northern road. She found something. At 8:07 p.m. on the night of the convoy incident, the satellite thermal feed for the northern road showed the convoy's vehicles clearly, 3 heat signatures moving north. And ahead of them, exactly where the dark Humvee had been, the thermal image showed nothing. Empty road, no heat signature at all, not a faint one, not a smeared one, nothing. A vehicle with a running engine, even a cold one, produces a thermal signature. It cannot avoid it. Heat is a byproduct of mechanical operation, of fuel combustion, of simple friction. There is no vehicle in existence that can run without generating heat. Alina sat with this information for a long time, looking at the thermal image on her screen, at the empty space in the road where a vehicle had been. She printed the image, wrote the timestamp in the margin, and brought it to Donna. Donna looked at it for 60 seconds. Then she said, "File it." "Yes, ma'am." And Vasquez. Donna looked at her over the image. "Good work." Alina almost said something more. She could feel the question pressing against the back of her teeth, the one that everyone on this base was now carrying around without asking aloud. What is it? Not what is making the noise, not what is on the road, but what is it fundamentally in the most basic sense of the question? What are they dealing with? She did not ask it. Because she understood, with the instinct of someone who had been in difficult situations before, that the answer to that question was not one that would help any of them right now. What would help them was doing the next thing and the next thing after that, and keeping everyone together and functioning and alert. She went back to her station and kept working. On the second night of the new observation setup, at 2:22 a.m., Faye's electromagnetic array triggered, all 4 sensors simultaneously. The readings spiked across the board, and the alert woke Faye, who was sleeping in the signals room, within seconds. She was at her console in 90 seconds, and immediately called Donna and Anthony on the internal line. By 2:30 a.m., the 3 of them were in the motor pool office looking at the live camera feed from the yard. The MRAP was moving, not slightly this time, not a 4-degree rotation. It was moving forward slowly, rolling toward the exit gate of the motor pool under its own power, with no driver, no lights, no visible explanation. It moved at perhaps 5 kilometers per hour, steadily and in a perfectly straight line, as though being driven by someone who knew exactly where they were going. Anthony's hand went to the wall radio before Donna stopped him. "Wait," she said. "It's going to reach the gate," he said. "I know. The gate is closed. I know." She watched the screen. Wait, the MRAP reached the gate and stopped. It sat there, idling in front of the closed gate, as though waiting for it to open. The engine sound on the camera audio was low and even. And then from somewhere outside the wire, faint but absolutely clear, the answering engine sound came. The other sound, the one they had been hearing for weeks, low and diesel and slightly wrong. The 2 sounds ran together for perhaps 30 seconds, like a conversation in a language made of engine noise, and then both sounds stopped simultaneously. The MRAP's engine went silent. The vehicle sat still in front of the closed gate, and from the motor pool yard, nothing moved. Donna, Faye, and Anthony stood in the office without speaking for a full minute. Then Anthony said very quietly, "It came to the gate. It was trying to get out. Or it was trying to answer," Faye said. They looked at her. "The sound outside," she said. "If you think of it as a signal, something sending a signal, and our vehicles responding to it." She hesitated. "I don't know what that means." But those 2 sounds together felt like, she searched for the word, communication. The electromagnetic readings on Faye's array had spiked during those 30 seconds and then dropped back to baseline the moment the sounds stopped. She noted the exact timestamps and waveform patterns and said nothing more, but her mind was working fast behind her careful expression. In the morning, Donna gathered the same group again and played the footage from the night before. She watched their faces as they watched it. Jimmy's jaw was tight, Alina was very still. Tesh, who had been briefed at 6 a.m. and was now watching the footage for the first time, sat with his forearms on the table and his eyes fixed on the screen. When it ended, he said, "We need to report this up the chain." "Agreed," Donna said. "I've been building the documentation for 6 weeks. Everything is logged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. The camera footage is backed up in 3 locations. Phase M data is complete." She looked at Tesh. "I can have a full briefing package ready by 1400 hours. Do it," he said. "And in the meantime, we treat this base the same way we've been treating it. Professional, functional. We don't let this become something that stops people from doing their jobs." He looked around the table. "I want to say something to this group. What we have experienced over the past several weeks is genuinely unexplained. I'm not going to stand here and tell you there is an obvious rational explanation, because clearly there isn't. But I'm also not going to allow this situation to undermine the discipline and effectiveness of this unit." He paused. "You have all handled this with exceptional professionalism. The documentation, the observation, the restraint, not panicking, not overreacting, not going towards something dangerous because of curiosity or fear. That is exactly what good soldiers do. I want you to know that I have seen what you've done here, and I am proud of it." The room was quiet in the particular way rooms are when something has been said that people needed to hear. That afternoon, Donna transmitted the full briefing package up the chain. She received an acknowledgement within 4 hours and a request for additional documentation within 6. She provided everything. 3 days later, a 4-person technical team arrived at FOB Kestrel with equipment that none of the base's soldiers had seen before, compact and unfamiliar. And they spent 2 days running tests across the perimeter and in the motor pool yard and on the northern road. They spoke to Donna for several hours and to Faye for nearly as long, and they looked at everything she had documented without expression and asked technical questions that were precise and careful. When they left, the lead technician, a woman with a government ID that didn't match any branch anyone recognized, shook Donna's hand and said, "You ran a textbook observation operation. Whatever this is, you gave us the best possible data set to work with." "What is it?" Donna asked. The woman paused. She looked at Donna with the look of someone who is deciding how much to say. "We're working on that," she said finally. "What I can tell you is that you are not the first base to report this phenomenon, and you are not the last." She left without elaborating. Donna stood in the road outside the gate and watched the team's vehicles drive away, and she thought about what that answer meant. That somewhere in other forward operating bases, in other dark corners of other wars, other soldiers had stood in the night and heard an engine that wasn't there, and watched their vehicles move without drivers, and felt the particular cold that comes not from temperature, but from encountering something at the absolute edge of understanding. The engine sound was never heard again at FOB Kestrel after that. The MRAP sat in its place in the motor pool and did not move. The camera recorded nothing unusual. Phase M array showed clean readings every night until the equipment was packed up and taken to the next posting. Whatever had been happening, it stopped, or it moved on. Which, as Jimmy said once, late at night, sitting on the north observation post looking out at the flat, dark desert, was not exactly the same thing. "Stopped means it's done," he said. "Moved on means it's somewhere else." Alina, sitting across from him, considered this. "Does the difference matter?" "It might," he said. "To whoever is somewhere else." They sat with that for a while, watching the desert, which was empty and still and completely quiet, the kind of quiet that feels held rather than natural. The kind that makes you aware of your own breathing, and the sound of your own pulse, and the size of the dark around you. Anthony kept his notebook. He carried it with him when the unit rotated out of FOB Kestrel 4 months later, tucked inside the front pocket of his bag, its pages filled with careful measurements and dates and observations. He did not show it to many people. But sometimes, years later, when he was back home in Knoxville, working in his father's garage with his hands in a familiar engine, he would think about that desert yard and the massive armored vehicle turning 4 degrees in the dark toward a sound that had no source. And he would stop what he was doing and just stand there for a moment, listening. Not because he expected to hear anything, but because the experience had taught him that listening, really listening, even when the world seemed quiet, was one of the most important things a person could do. Donna retired from the Army at 22 years. At her retirement ceremony, A few people made the usual jokes about her being impossible to surprise, about her having seen everything. She smiled at the jokes because they were meant well. She had seen many things in 22 years. She had seen bravery and exhaustion and grief, and the particular grace that people find in themselves when they are asked to do very hard things. She had seen good soldiers make good decisions in situations that offered no good options. And she had seen, in a motor pool yard in the Iraqi desert in the middle of a cold December night, a 15-ton armored vehicle turn toward the sound of something calling to it from the dark. She did not include that in her retirement speech. Some things, she had come to understand, did not belong to the world of speeches and ceremonies. They belonged to the night, to the small groups of people who had been there, to the journals written in careful handwriting and kept in bedside drawers. They belonged to the memory of standing in the dark with a flashlight and a notebook, and the absolute, humbling awareness that the world was larger and stranger than any training had prepared you for. And to the quiet decision made in that same dark to face it anyway. That decision, she thought, was the truest thing she had ever learned in uniform.